If you were hot on the trail of Jigsaw's secret apprentice, when any wrong move could mean a horrifying death, what would you do? Jigsaw may be gone, but the games are far from over, and each of the players holds a dark secret that could cost them their lives. Will they finally learn their lessons or pay the ultimate price? Stick around, because we're going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the consequences of your actions in Saw 5. These agents are in for a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, but who's the predator and who's the prey? There's only one way to find out. Somewhere deep in an abandoned building, this man wakes up chained to a dissection table with heavy restraints around his ankles, wrists, and neck. As he begins to struggle and yell for help, Jigsaw's puppet appears on the TV in the corner of the room, but this trap isn't like the ones before. The man is a convicted murderer, but only ended up serving 5 years. To save his own life, he'll have to destroy the hands that he used to take another's, by voluntarily placing them into crushers on both sides of the table. Otherwise, he'll be cut in half by a swinging blade. The timer starts, and after finally gathering up the courage, the man places his hands into the machines, crushing every bone inside. He's done exactly what Jigsaw asked, but the blade doesn't stop, lowering down closer and closer until it completely slices him in half. As he dies, he notices someone watching him through a window, but it's too late. Strahm here tries kicking his way through the door, but it's no use. He can't get any service on his phone either, which means that he won't be calling for help anytime soon. Taking out his flashlight to get a better look around, he notices a particular section of the wall outlined with glow-in-the-dark glue. It's a secret door, but Strahm knows better than to take anything for granted here. Carefully looking through, he notices a tape player hanging on the other side. On it, Jigsaw congratulates the agent for finally tracking him down, although he questions whether or not Strahm will be able to help himself from digging any deeper. Despite his warning to go no further, Strahm decides to investigate what else Jigsaw has to hide, but that was his biggest mistake. Eventually, he comes to a door, but as soon as he passes through it, he's suddenly attacked by a mysterious figure wearing a pig mask, who knocks him out with an injection of sedatives. When he finally wakes up, Strahm realizes that he's been taken to another testing room, with his head locked inside of a glass box. Suspended from the ceiling above him are 2 jugs full of water, with hoses running down into the box, threatening to drown him unless he can find a way to escape. Panicking, he begins searching for his handgun and other tools, only to realize that they've been placed out of reach on the other side of the room. That's when the box begins to fill, with the water quickly rising until his entire head is submerged. At the last moment, Strahm discovers that he still has a pen in his pocket. Thinking quickly, he jams the pen straight into his windpipe, opening up an airway and allowing him to breathe until rescue finally arrives. Outside, a team of officers are already on the scene. Hoffman here claims to be the sole survivor, but he's immediately proven wrong when paramedics wheel Strahm out of the building, injured, but still alive. It looks like his plan didn't go as smoothly as he thought, leaving Hoffman with one more loose end left to tie up. Okay, before we go any further, let's quickly recap what's going on here. We're now in Jigsaw's workshop. This guy, Agent Strahm, just shot this guy, Jeff, who just killed Jigsaw himself, which accidentally set off a trap, resulting in the death of Jeff's wife, Lynn. Another guy, Detective Hoffman, who's been secretly working for Jigsaw, just locked Agent Strahm in a meat freezer. But Agent Strahm doesn't know that it was him. All caught up? Good. Now let's see how he's going to escape. Okay, serious question. When are we going to learn our lesson here? These agents have been following Jigsaw for months, studying every trap while accumulating mountains of evidence in their attempt to understand his methods and eventually bring him to justice. But here they are, still making the same old mistakes like this is their first day on the job. He may have survived, but I think it's safe to say that this was an awfully close call, especially when the ideal solution was made crystal clear from the very beginning. Agent Strahm, you f***ed up. To be fair, I have to give credit where credit is due. That emergency tracheotomy was incredibly badass, but it wasn't pretty, but it certainly got the job done, and I can't argue with the results here. But with that being said, there's just one problem. The entire test could have been avoided if you'd only stopped for a moment and taken Jigsaw's warning. I mean, the instructions were clear. Wait it out in the room and be safe. Or go it alone deeper into Jigsaw's evil lair and risk a horrifying death. But why should you trust a criminally insane death game designer in the first place, right? Well, there's plenty of examples to look at from the past. And as the old saying goes, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Let's see. Off the top of my head, we've got Detective Matthews, Officer Rigg, Amanda, that guy Jeff who you just shot, and even Agent Perez, who you were standing in the same room with when she went down. What do all of these people have in common? Two things, mostly. They didn't listen to Jigsaw and now they're dead, or at least horrifically injured when it comes to your former partner. It doesn't take the world's greatest detective to start noticing the pattern here. By now, it should be painfully clear that if Jigsaw specifically warns you not to do something, then it's probably in your best interest to listen up. Clearly, he knew that you'd find that tape. So it was all but guaranteed that he'd have an ambush set up for you if you decided to push on. And personally, I wouldn't want to take that chance. You'd already done the hard part and found a way out of the room. So the smart call here would have been to use a piece of furniture to make sure that your escape route couldn't shut again, and then just sit tight for a while and wait to see what happened. It'd be one thing if you were on your own with no chance of rescue coming anytime soon, but luckily that wasn't the case here. Although you may have been one of the first to get there, the entire city police force was just minutes behind, and they would have found you safe and sound if you'd only stayed put. Of course, you just couldn't wait for backup, and you had to go poking around all by yourself. Not a smart move, to say the least. You started off strong, but help me understand something. When you were working your way down the hall, carefully peeking around every corner like you were trying to clutch a 1v5 in Rainbow Six Siege, why did you decide to get sloppy the first time that you came to a door? Sure, you checked to your right, but believe it or not, there are actually other directions where a surprise attack could come from, like left, for example. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what ended up happening. You brought a gun to a syringe fight, man. This should have been easy, but you let your guard down at the worst possible moment and it nearly cost you your life. Keep your head on a swivel next time, and maybe you won't end up with your head inside of a glass box that's quickly filling with water. Speaking of the box, here's something that you could have tried. Instead of immediately resorting to putting a hole in your neck with a ballpoint pen, why not just reach up and try to pull the hoses out before the water started coming in? It might seem too simple to work, but it would have certainly been worth the attempt. To make matters worse, this was a trap that you were never supposed to survive in the first place. And you only managed to get out by dumb luck since they forgot to take that pen. Congratulations, I guess, but in the future, it might be wise to start making better decisions before that lucky streak inevitably runs out. When you walk right into a trap that could have been avoided simply by doing nothing at all, Agent Strahm, you f***ed up. Later, Jigsaw's ex-wife, Jill Tuck, meets with a lawyer following his death. It turns out that he left her a mysterious VHS tape with instructions that it be played only after he had died. On the tape, Jigsaw gives his final goodbye, confessing that he's always felt guilty for the tragic loss of their unborn child. He's also left her a strange box, and says that she'll know what to do with the items that she finds inside. Using a key that she wears around her neck, Jill opens the box and appears deeply affected by what she discovers, but she shuts the lid before anyone else can see its contents. Meanwhile, the police chief holds a press conference where Hoffman is promoted to lieutenant and mistakenly given credit for finally solving the Jigsaw case. Taking the podium, he gives a speech about the value of life and importance of justice, all while standing beside a table full of photographs of the fallen officers who he helped kill. He might think that he's gotten away with it, But he's about to find out that somebody knows his secret. Back in his office, he finds an envelope tucked under his keyboard, and inside is a card with a simple but threatening message, reading simply, "I know who you are." Thinking that it must be from Strahm, he goes to the evidence locker and steals the agent's cell phone from the collection. While he's there, another officer informs him that he's needed at the local hospital, where Strahm's partner, Agent Perez, has recently passed away after falling into one of Jigsaw's traps herself. When he arrives at the room, he finds Strahm inside waiting for him. The agent is clearly suspicious, mentioning that his partner's last words were Hoffman's name, and pointing out that he looks just a bit too good for having just survived a Jigsaw trap himself. Furious, Hoffman tells him to back off, saying that the truth has already been decided. He's a hero, and the Jigsaw case is closed. But Strahm won't be giving up without a fight. A short while later, Strahm's boss, Agent Erickson, pays him a visit with even more bad news. Although he wants to interview Jill once more, they've decided to take him off of the case, placing him on medical leave until he recovers from his injuries. Jigsaw himself may be dead, but Hoffman still has a job to do. Alone, he makes his way to a hidden room where several monitors are set up showing security footage of the next string of tests. After moving some figures around on a nearby diorama to represent their progress, he stands by to observe as the victims slowly come to their senses. And the next game begins. Somewhere deep within the city's sewer system, 5 complete strangers wake up with collars strapped around their necks, attaching them to cables which run through 2 huge razor blades behind each of their heads. By now, they're all well aware of Jigsaw and immediately recognize that they're in one of his traps. Although this woman points out that he's supposed to be dead, that doesn't change their current situation, and they'll need to decide their next moves carefully if they want to survive. Just then, a TV at the opposite side of the room turns on, and Jigsaw explains the rules of the game. According to him, they were each born with advantages in life, but used them selfishly in ways that hurt others. Now, they will have to work together and resist their selfish urges to make it out alive. Across from them are the keys that will set them free, but when one of them makes the first move, they'll activate a 1-minute timer for everyone. If the timer runs out, or the cable is pulled too tight before they can escape, then whoever's left will be pulled into the blades and separated from their head. With that, another timer on the wall starts to count down from 15 minutes, and the first game begins. As they try to figure out what to do, this guy Charles points out that the longer timer is actually connected to 2 nail bombs. They'll have to go for the keys before it runs out, otherwise they'll all be killed. Charles also happens to know a lot about the others' personal lives, but won't admit why that is just yet. Although some of them want to play it cool, things quickly escalate into an argument, which is when this guy Malik decides to make the first move, lunging across the room and starting the second countdown. Using his greater strength, Charles pulls his way over and smashes through the glass with his hand wrapped in his shirt, making him the first one to get a key. This woman, Luba, makes it next, followed by Britt, and leaving only Malik and Ashley to go. Fighting for their lives, they each struggle to reach their box, but Malik overpowers her and gets there first. The timer runs out just as the 4 survivors unfasten their collars, abruptly pulling Ashley into the blades and slicing her head clean off. They're all completely horrified, but with the nail bomb timer still counting down, there isn't a moment to waste. Following Charles, the survivors make their way into the next chamber, with Britt stopping to grab each one of the 5 keys, just in case she winds up needing them somewhere down the road. Okay, this game was absolutely horrifying. Not only were they working against the time limit, but there were 4 other victims, all fighting for survival, making the situation much more complicated. The pressure was definitely on, but there was no time to lose your head unless you wanted to end up like Ashley here. So what was the best approach? They had no way of knowing this, but later, the survivors are going to realize that there was actually a trick to this game that could have saved all their lives. For now though, they can only work with the information that they have. They know that making a move for the keys will start a short timer that could cause anyone who hasn't gotten free to die. But they don't have all day to sit around and think up a strategy either, since if they don't get out of there within 15 minutes, then they'll all be killed by the nail bombs. This means that the ultimate goal is to get a key as quickly as possible, but you have to be careful with your approach. You don't want to be the first person to make a move, because triggering the timer will instantly make you the asshole to everyone else. And there's a good chance that they'll turn on you down the road if they also manage to survive. Now, if you wanted to play things fair, then you could suggest that each person quickly goes one at a time instead of panicking and starting a tug of war. The only problem here is that this leaves a lot up to chance and relies on the others to all act for the good of the group as a whole instead of just themselves. With such limited time, this could get incredibly risky fast, and personally, I wouldn't be willing to take that chance with a bunch of strangers who I just met, especially knowing that team players don't usually end up in Jigsaw's traps in the first place. With this in mind, it seems like the best bet was to do exactly what Charles here did, and bide your time until someone else made the first move, before immediately going beast mode once the short timer started and doing whatever it takes to get your key. At that point, it's do or die, so no one can hold it against you for wanting to ensure your own survival, and the person who started it will take the fall if the others want someone to blame. By keeping a wide stance, maintaining a low center of gravity, and going for it at just the right moment, you should be able to reach the key without being pulled off balance by the others, giving you the chance to live another day regardless of what happens to everybody else. Besides that, it doesn't seem like there's really much else that anyone could have done differently here, at least not with the knowledge that was available to them at the time. Britt here made the wise choice by collecting all of the keys before she left the room, and as gruesome as it sounds, I'd consider searching Ashley's body while I was at it, just to see if she had anything on her that could help me out with whatever we end up facing down the line, since she clearly won't be moving on to the next challenge herself. The other four have survived the first challenge, but they still have a long way to go before they're finally free. He tries contacting him to set up a meeting, but since Strahm has now been put on leave, they transfer him over to the voicemail box of Agent Erickson, where he leaves a message explaining why he called. Meanwhile, Strahm pays an unannounced visit to his office, searching for a lead. He runs Hoffman's name through the criminal records database, but gets no results. He's not ready to give up yet though, and starts looking through the recorded list of all Jigsaw's victims, deciding to research the one who was just found before Hoffman was on the case, a man named Seth Baxter. Baxter was a convicted murderer, and his victims was none other than Hoffman's own sister. This gives Strahm an idea, and he follows the lead to the location where Baxter's body was discovered, the pendulum trap room that was originally believed to be one of Jigsaw's tests. As he looks over photos from the crime scene, he slowly begins to put the pieces together. It turns out that Hoffman was the one who set up the trap as revenge for his sister's murder, arranging it to look like one of Jigsaw's killings to deflect any suspicion from himself. And he would have gotten away with it too, if it weren't for meddling Strahm here. He's getting closer to the truth, but there's still a game to be played. Back down in the sewers, the four survivors enter the next test chamber. Realizing that shutting the door will start another timer, they decide to slow down for a minute while they try to figure out exactly how they're all connected. Once again, Charles reveals that he knows a lot about their personal information, drawing serious suspicion from the other three. Luba here confesses that she works in city planning and used her position to push through controversial building permits for her wealthy father. Britt is a senior executive for a real estate development company, and Malik admits that he's just a trust fund baby. This leaves only Charles, who finally reveals that he's a journalist for a tabloid newspaper, which explains how he seems to know so much about each of them. They get so caught up in each other's dirty laundry that they nearly forget about the nail bomb timer counting down in the other room. Charles here closes the door at the last moment, protecting them from the explosion, but also starting the next test. Through a recorded video, Jigsaw explains that they'll need to take cover within one of the 4 locked pipes before the next bombs go off. The keys are hidden inside glass jars hanging from the ceiling, but only 3 of them will open the pipes, meaning that one of the victims will have to be left out to die. Now that they have their instructions, the countdown begins, leaving them with only 1 minute to find shelter. Before going for the jars, Charles instead puts a beat down on Malik, dropping him to the floor and making it perfectly clear that he'll do whatever it takes to survive. While he breaks open each container, the others begin digging through the scraps, with Britt and Luba each finding a key that gets them to safety. Malik happens to find one too, but Charles here steps on his arm, prepared to steal it from him and leave him to die. Suddenly, Luba strikes him in the back with a board, knocking Charles down and buying Malik a chance to escape. With only seconds remaining, the 3 take cover with the pipes, just as the bombs detonate and blow Charles to bits. Okay, this test just gave going down the tubes a whole new meaning. Charles here thought that he could win by being the most ruthless, but his blind fury ended up being exactly what got him killed. Despite there being only 3 keys, there was, in fact, a way that all of them could have survived just like the last game. But for this one, it was so obvious that they actually could have figured it out ahead of time if only they'd approached the situation more rationally. Now, knowing what connects them all might be important somewhere down the road, but what's much more crucial at the moment is figuring out how they're going to survive this chamber. Instead of wasting their time pointing fingers and trying to decide who's the biggest a-hole, what they needed to do here was carefully observe their surroundings while they had the luxury of the timer not being activated just yet. You see, the key here is to avoid starting the next timer until they absolutely have to. They ended up doing this by accident, but keeping the entrance door open until the last possible second was a wise idea, because it bought them extra time to look around. When they left the last chamber, there were still over 12 minutes left on the countdown, which means that if they'd used this time wisely instead of bickering back and forth, then they could have worked out what was going on with this test before they were ever in any real danger. There isn't much to work with in this particular room, which helps to quickly narrow down the possibilities. All that they were presented with were the locked tubes, glass jars hanging from the ceiling, and nail bombs hooked up to the timer. So it wouldn't have been a huge logical stretch to come to the conclusion that they were going to need whatever was in those jars. The next step is to obviously start breaking them open, and once they realized that there were keys inside, they could have worked together to find the ones that fit the locks. By pairing off with 2 people smashing the jars and the other 2 quickly checking the keys, they could quickly find the right ones to get them to safety, hopefully before the timer in this chamber ever even started and they were actually in any real danger. Jigsaw may have said that only 3 of the tubes would be open, but simply by looking at them, it's clear to see that 2 people could easily fit inside one together. Hell, even all 4 of them could have squeezed into one tube if they were willing to get up close and personal for a moment. And with the alternative being death by nail bomb, I don't see why anyone would hesitate to share the space. Since they only had 1 minute once the timer started, they should have worked together to find as many keys as possible, and then, when it got too close to explosion time, piled in together to as many of the tubes as they'd managed to unlock. After all, it's always better to keep as many people alive as you can if you have the opportunity, because you never know when having a good meat shield around could mean the difference between life and death. Later, they're going to realize that sharing is caring is exactly the point that Jigsaw was trying to get across here. But for now, it looks like we're down to only 3 survivors left standing, and we'll have to see if they can make it through whatever's coming up next. Now we see how Detective Hoffman ended up working for Jigsaw in the first place. After hearing about his copycat killing, Jigsaw ambushed Hoffman in his apartment elevator, sedating him and taking the unconscious detective back to his workshop. There, Hoffman woke up restrained to a chair with a double-barreled shotgun pointing straight at his neck, quickly realizing that he would be killed if he tried to escape. Putting his finger on the trigger, Jigsaw pressed it down and revealed that the chamber was actually empty, before cutting Hoffman loose and offering him a chance at redemption. Using the knowledge of what he'd done, he blackmailed Hoffman into becoming his apprentice, or instead facing life in prison for his crimes. Realizing that he had no other choice, Hoffman reluctantly agreed. Back in the present day, Agent Erickson decides to return Hoffman's phone call. While they're talking, Hoffman explains that Strahm was working on a theory that Jigsaw had a second accomplice, and that it was possibly someone who worked within the department. Erickson says that he wasn't aware, but tells Hoffman to call him back in the morning, and decides to do some digging for himself. Continuing his search, Strahm makes his way to another crime scene where a man named Paul was forced to crawl through several cages made of barbed wire, leading to his death. This was one of the first games that Hoffman helped to set up, with Jigsaw making him watch as the man was put to the test. Later, he would supply confidential police files to help organize the abandoned house game, where several victims were tested at once, including Jigsaw's second apprentice, Amanda Young. Although Hoffman thought that his plans left too much up to dumb luck, Jigsaw here disagreed, saying that he could anticipate how the games would play out by simply understanding the victims' minds. The remaining 3 survivors enter the next test chamber, where they find an ominous-looking bathtub full of dirty water, and more nail bombs connected to a 15-minute timer. As they take a moment to catch their breath, the discussion turns back to what they each did in order to end up there. Malik finally admits that he caused an accident which led to the deaths of several people, although he thought that nobody else knew about it until now. The other 2 were each involved in their own shady business practices, with Luba accepting bribes to push permits through, and Britt resorting to dishonest strategies when she needed to clear out old buildings to make room for new development. Annoyed, Malik thinks that there's more connecting them than they realize, but talking things over isn't getting them any closer to safety. With nowhere else to go, Britt closes the chamber door, and the next game begins. Through the TV, Jigsaw explains that the next game is meant to bring them closer together. The door out of the room is locked by 5 electrical circuits, which they'll need to close by finding a way to connect them through the water in the bathtub. In 3 minutes, the locks will seal the door shut forever, leaving them all trapped inside unless they can solve the puzzle before the time limit runs out. The countdown begins, and Malik immediately realizes that the cables can't reach into the water itself. That's when Luba orders him to get in the tub, planning on using his body to connect the circuit, which would allow her and Britt to escape, but inevitably kill him in the process. Malik, of course, refuses, but Luba isn't taking no for an answer, and strikes him with a wooden pole, forcing him into the water. It looks like it's all over for the trust fund baby, but suddenly, Britt here makes the decision to betray her fellow girl boss, secretly grabbing one of the electrodes and stabbing Luba in the neck while her back is turned, clutching her wound. The woman collapses to the floor dead. Malik here doesn't know whether to be horrified or grateful, but there's no time to waste. Grabbing Luba's body, they place her into the bathwater and begin carefully connecting each of the wires one by one, with only seconds to spare. Malik completes the circuit by jamming a final wired hook into the back of her head. The door to the next chamber clicks open, and the remaining 2 survivors rush out as the woman's body convulses from the electricity and smoke begins to fill the room. Okay, talk about an electrifying ending. As cutthroat as it was, Britt here definitely made the right call by taking out Luba, since she clearly would have done the same thing to them if she'd had the chance. The thing is, there was actually a way to complete this challenge without anyone having to die if they'd used a bit of critical thinking. You probably already know that electricity and water can be a dangerous combination, but what if you had to find a way to use them to escape from a death game? These 3 survivors are trapped with only one way out, and to open the door, they'll need to complete the electrical circuit. The problem is that the wires won't reach the water without a body to connect them, or at least that's what they think. In survival scenarios, experts know that using an article of clothing like a t-shirt is an easy way to transport water from one location to another. Simply submerge the shirt and wait for the fabric to absorb as much as possible, and then wring it out in the place where you want the water to be. By using this method, they could have made a trail around the room connecting each of the electrodes, which should pop the doors open without the need to sacrifice one of their own. Unfortunately, our survivors here made a different decision, leaving only 2 remaining for the next challenge. Now, the water itself isn't what really causes the danger here. Believe it or not, pure water is actually an electrical insulator, which means that it doesn't conduct electricity. It's the ions within the water, which come from sources like dissolved salt that create an electrical pathway. With that being said, one look at that bathwater tells you that it's anything but pure, so climbing in there while holding onto the live wires is going to be an immediate death sentence for anyone who was dumb enough to try it. Of course, a dead body can't fight back, so killing Luba and using her to complete the circuit was definitely one way to get the job done. But like I said before, it's better to keep the others alive if you can help it, because you never know when you need a quick meat shield down the line. When the timer started, they were given 3 minutes to make the connection. It's a short window, but if they acted quickly, then it could have been plenty of time to put this plan into action. As soon as they knew what they needed to do here, each of them should have used an article of clothing that they could absorb as much of the bathwater as possible with, before making a circle around the tub by wringing the water out onto the floor. They'll need to be careful because dropping the water directly onto the live wires could end up electrocuting them in the process. So the safer bet here would be to lay out the path first, and then carefully place each source of electricity into the line, completing the circuit and opening the door with all 3 of them alive. With Luba down, that leaves only Britt and Malik left standing, but they're about to find out that their next test is the most horrifying one of all. Back at the FBI offices, Jill shows up and requests a meeting with Agent Erickson. Despite the fact that Jigsaw himself is dead, she believes that she's still being followed by Agent Strahm, although she isn't sure exactly why. Meanwhile, Strahm returns to the room where Jigsaw was killed, searching for any connection to Hoffman that he can find. It turns out that, while Jigsaw was on his deathbed, he ordered Hoffman to track down each of the 5 victims who are currently being tested, and promised that in the end, everything would become clear. Putting the pieces together, Strahm finally realizes for certain that no one besides Hoffman was meant to survive the traps in Jigsaw's warehouse, leaving him as the hero and getting rid of anyone who might have gotten too close to the truth. Furious, he sets out on his mission for revenge. While watching from a parked car, Hoffman uses Strahm's cell phone to call Agent Erickson before quickly hanging up. Confused, the agent immediately calls him back, but Hoffman ignores the call and powers off the phone. Growing suspicious, Erickson has his assistant try to put a locator on Strahm's phone, but she isn't able to get a signal just yet. Instead, Hoffman returns to the secret control room before powering the phone back on, knowing that the agent will track him there and planning to set Strahm up to take the fall. Down in the sewers, the last 2 survivors make their way into the final chamber. In the center of the room stands a massive device with 5 tubes containing circular saw blades. Below them is a single breaker, with a finishing bobber resting inside that's connected to the exit door. Horrified, Britt realizes that they're meant to willingly put their arms into the machine, filling the beaker with their own blood to escape. Just as she's about to close the door and start the game, Malik notices that this exit happens to have a keyhole and tells Britt to try her keys before anything else. It's a good idea, but the keys don't fit, and that's when she discovers the terrible truth. Each of the 5 keys is exactly the same, which means that, from the very beginning, it was possible for all of them to survive every challenge. If they'd worked together instead of acting selfishly, then the 5 of them could have each spared just a small amount of blood to open the final door. Now, there's only 2 of them left, and still just one way to escape. As the chamber seals shut, a message from Jigsaw begins to explain what they've already figured out. To open the door, they'll need to fill the beaker with 10 pints of blood, which is approximately as much as the average person has. The body can survive with as little as 5 pints, but death is certain if they lose any more, leaving them with only 2 options. One person gives all of their blood and dies so that the other can go free, or they work together, giving 5 pints of blood each to escape, but possibly both dying in the process. With that, the countdown begins, giving them 15 minutes to make their choice. Now that they've reached the end of the line, Malik here decides that it's finally time to come clean. The truth is that he knew Charles because the man was writing a story about him. Some time ago, he was offered a large amount of illegal substances to burn down an abandoned building. The only problem was that the building wasn't really abandoned at all. The fire that he started resulted in the deaths of 8 innocent people, but his powerful father cut a deal with the investigators to sweep his involvement under the rug. With his confession, Britt finally realizes how they're all connected. The first victim was the fire inspector who helped to cover it up. Luba accepted the bribe to sign off on the building permits. Charles took a deal to cover up the story. Malik here set the fire and took the fall, and Britt herself was the one who organized the whole scheme. Furious, Malik shouts that they both deserve this punishment, but whether they're ready to accept the blame or not, it doesn't change the fact that there's only one way out. Okay, this is seriously messed up. They've managed to reach the final challenge, which means that freedom is only one door away, but they've just made one problem. They've made the wrong decisions through each of the tests, leaving them with only 2 survivors when all 5 of them were supposed to make it to the end. Now they're faced with the choice to either work together or fight to the death and use the loser to open the door. It's a dire situation, but there's actually a third option that could allow them both to escape unscathed. And it's sitting right back in the room where they just came from. By observing the device in front of them, Britt actually managed to figure out exactly what they needed to do before the test even officially began. Since at the time the door to the previous chamber was still open, they could have quickly circled back and detached the electrodes from Luba's body. Then it would have been as simple as sticking her arm into the machine, using her blood to fill up the beaker, and opening the final door. She's already dead after all, so I'm sure at this point Luba wouldn't mind helping out one last time. If, for some reason, this wasn't an option, then the hard truth is that there's no way that I'd be willing to put my arm into that machine. From a wound that severe, a person could completely bleed out in as quickly as 2 minutes without immediate medical attention. And it's not like Jigsaw has paramedics standing by on the scene, so given the choice between one of us dying and the other getting to survive, or both of us working together enduring unimaginable pain and possibly dying anyway, I'd choose to sacrifice the other person. Around the room are several items like rope and pieces of metal that could be used as impromptu weapons, and by taking action first and using the element of surprise, it could be possible to take the other person down without much of a fight. Would this mean that I haven't learned my lesson and make me a murderer in the eyes of Jigsaw? Maybe, but he's dead. So I'd prefer to take my chances instead of voluntarily bringing myself to the brink of death, just so that some other degenerate might survive too. There's 10 pints of blood standing between them and freedom, and we'll have to see if anyone makes it out alive. After tying off their arms to control the bleeding, the two gather their courage and stick their hands into the machine. Pushing through the pain, they press their hands further and further into the saw blade as the breaker slowly begins to fill with their blood. Finally, the door opens, but Malik passes out from the shock, his left arm having been sawed completely in half. Britt isn't doing much better, but with the last of her strength, she stumbles out through the door and into the control room. There, she's found by Agent Erickson, who has just arrived after tracing Strahm's phone to the location. Although they're both on the verge of death, he's able to call the paramedics just in time to save their lives. They've both survived, but the games aren't over just yet. Based on the planted evidence, Erickson determines that Strahm must be the killer and puts out an order for his arrest. Meanwhile, Strahm tails Hoffman through the city until they eventually come to the house, where Jigsaw set up his nerve gas trap. Following him inside, he discovers a secret door leading to the basement and descends down into the service tunnels below. After carefully working his way from room to room, he finally arrives at a chamber where he finds a large glass box containing a tape player and a layer of broken glass. Instead of Jigsaw, this time it's Hoffman on the recording, asking if he's finally learned his lesson. He explains that the only way for Strahm to survive is to trust what he says and get in the box. Okay, this is it, the grand finale. The moment where Strahm finally proves that he's learned his lesson, or is it? It sure does seem like a trap, but after all that he's been through, if I were in Strahm's shoes, my gut instinct here would be to just get in the damn box and listen for once. What makes things more complicated though is that this time it's Hoffman, not Jigsaw, speaking through the tape, which means that there's a chance that the rules could have changed. So we can't trust the box, but where does that leave us? Well, there's actually another option, and it's surprisingly simple. Just turn around and walk right back out of the room, because at this point, the door is still wide open. This would mean a probable shootout with Hoffman here, but personally, I'd rather take my chances in a fair gunfight than with one of Jigsaw's traps. Once again, the solution that would save Strahm's life is right in front of him, but he's about to make a decision that's going to cost him everything. Hearing a noise behind him, Strahm instead shuts off the tape and quickly hides just out of sight. It's Hoffman, and while the man is distracted by the discarded tape player, Strahm approaches him from behind with his pistol pointed at the back of his head. Seeing his reflection in the glass, Hoffman quickly spins around and knocks the weapon away just as Strahm pulls the trigger. The two battle it out hand to hand, exchanging several vicious blows, but Strahm eventually overpowers him, throwing him into the glass box and slamming the door shut. Just then, the electronic lock activates, sealing Hoffman inside. He's not the only one who's trapped though, because at the same moment, the door to the chamber shuts on its own, trapping Strahm in there with him. Desperate to escape, he tries to find another way out, but it's too late. Suddenly, the walls of the chamber begin closing in around him as the box containing Hoffman descends safely into the floor. Strahm tries to stop the walls to no avail, and they continue moving in closer until there's only feet to spare. Thinking quickly, he uses what strength he has left to scale the walls and starts kicking the wire ceiling in a last-ditch attempt to get free. It's a good idea, but the wire won't budge, and Strahm here is squashed flat like a pancake, while a triumphant Hoffman watches from below. Okay, I'm starting to get confused. Why did they cast two white male actors that look almost identical? Strahm? Hoffman? Who's doing what? What's doing who? What do you think happened? Let us know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe, and check out the How to Beat playlist for more videos just like this. Also be sure to check out The Kill Plan, the new show which just launched on the channel. It's awesome. And until next time, have a damn good day.